Okay, it's 6:30, and we'll go ahead and get this started.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. We have two topics for you tonight. The first one we'll start out with is the special improvement districts. I don't want to preempt some of the stuff that Deacon's going to cover. He's pulled together a PowerPoint that kind of explains what special improvement districts are, how we could go about levying one, what the cost might be, some pros and cons, those types of things. But just from a historical perspective, what brings us here is there's a few places in town that have dirt roads. Each one has a little bit of a different history, a little bit of a different reason that's prompting the discussion and different nuances. From my time being here, the only special improvement district we've done was north off of Weber Drive, where there is a section of privately owned property that honestly wasn't going, that no one property would have enough money to run the utilities. And so we did it where we issued a bond, they did a vote, and then we had gotten misinformation on Excel and had to go back and do another one for the electrical. So it's kind of a limited, but we do have a little bit of experience. And that gets us to where we are tonight for some of these unique areas. So Deacon, I'll turn it over to you. And I might jump in if we need to talk more on one of the issues, but you got it.
Totally. There's a lot of information when we talk about these. So really, when we put this together, we wanted to make sure we are taking as much as we could into account as far as not only just the cost, but who would it affect, how would it affect them, who gets a say, who doesn't get a say, because it's just a very complicated thing. So just some of the things we'll talk about. We'll just kind of give a brief overview about what an SID is. We'll talk about some of the unknowns and assumptions that we've made and discussed when trying to put this and these costs together. We ran through a couple of different options with each of these scenarios. And so what we did was we looked at Comanche Road, Foster Avenue, and Chico Avenue. But there were some other things we wanted to also tag in there as far as like, how do we try to anticipate the unintended consequences? And also, what are some current unknowns that make these sorts of decisions we make today harder because there's just not enough information. One thing that I think is really also helpful is to kind of consider the best, quote unquote, and worst case scenarios as far as, when we present a couple of different options, like this is how much one person or one property owner is going to pay. This is the low end of the lowest, and this is the high end of the highest. One other thing I did want to mention are some elevation issues, because it's kind of a 50,000-foot view on some of these properties that really impacts its developability. So as we go through some of the costs of some of these properties, I think you'll certainly see what I'm kind of leading you guys towards, and then just some kind of other final mental dribblings. Okay, so how do SIDs work, special improvements? So typically, special improvement districts are initiated by a resolution that you all would pass, or if a petition of half the property owners, I should say the property owners owning more than 50% of the total abutting length of the street or whatever would be so you have to meet that certain threshold, I guess. So it's not 50% of all the property owners. It's proportioned based on how much property someone owns. So if you have a block that's very, very long and one person owns 75% of it, they could hypothetically start one or stop one under both of these first two bullet points. Some of the scenarios we'll look at have unincorporated property. So there would be an extra step where the county would issue a resolution saying that, yeah, they would want the properties that are not within city limits to participate. There's also at least one situation, maybe more, where the city owns a property there. So the city would be responsible for paying its part of the share. And this is kind of an important concept in bonding elections. So when it goes to the vote, only individuals get to vote. So if, you have a couple who owns a property, they get 2 votes. If you have an LLC that owns 90% of the property, they don't get a vote. So that's one of the other challenges when we look at some of these scenarios that I think from an equity perspective, it's really important to consider.
And when we talk about voting, it's only those properties within this district that we're planning on making. And so when we start looking at maps, you'll see, like, if we're looking at Foster, it's those properties that are along there. They're the only ones that are voting. It's not a citywide vote. It's only those properties type of situation.
Excellent, thank you. And then, so if the bond passes by those folks that would only be included in that district, everyone would have to pay, regardless of whether they're owned by a life estate or an LLC or a business, or just an individual. So as far as some of the unknowns, one thing that we just don't have a really good way to suss out at this sort of level is, how do we deal with the stormwater? So as soon as you put asphalt down and you make surfaces unable to percolate moisture, you have to take it somewhere. And so, it's a complicated thing that we can't, we can make some assumptions, but we're talking about areas that are large enough that need more of a regional solution. And we've got the groundwork for that, at least with the Foster lift station and some of those kind of general plans, but it's a pretty big aspect of this discussion. So kind of just for this, we're just kind of taking it out of the consideration for now. There's also some areas that are really low lying. So there's places on Main Street, for example, if you're driving on 160, 160 is here, but then there's properties that are down here, and that's because when they built that road, they built it up so that they could get drainage. Well, what happens is you have properties that are essentially in a hole. And there are certainly properties in some of these districts, these potential districts, that would fall into that scenario too. What do we do with properties that are huge and vacant and we don't know how they will develop? Essentially, we'll make a few assumptions for these, but if it's 60 acres, we don't know how it's going to develop because there's so many unknowns. Some of the properties that we'll talk about would also honestly be undevelopable without a lot of material being brought in because it's so low lying. And so I'll show you guys a map at the end that kind of shows, some places that are where there's an old river channel, so it's really low lying and there's a lot of vegetation, a lot of water that ends up, either the subwater comes up or the water kind of fills in the pockets. And so that will present some additional challenges for some of these other properties. And then, really, we used our 2024 Washington Avenue construction prices, but, they're pretty solid, at least to have a discussion, but they're not like engineer quality estimates for costs.
And so before we start drilling down into some of these, I didn't do a good job on getting some of the history and why we're here tonight, because sometimes there's properties on Foster who've connected with council members to try to get Foster paved and to look at a special improvement district. I think there's property owners along, is it Chico?
I would say all of the Stockton division, Chico,
that gets
Catwood.
connected with council members about when are the roads going to get paved, all of that kind of stuff. And so council's given direction in the past for us to begin approaching the property owners to talk about creating a special improvement district and all of that. And part of the reason we haven't, one was workload issue, but we've worked to address that and pull development services out and do some things like that. But another issue is there's a lot of complexities here, and we're going to really get into those. But what we hope to get from you tonight is just a general direction. And so that direction might be that one or all of them are too complex, or it's going to be too expensive for certain property owners. So you're not interested in having staff have the conversation. It could be that one or two that you're like, well, if they're open to it, we still want to look and see and give that direction. But if they put up a lot of resistance, we want to back off. Or you guys might want to say for one or all three, nope, these roads need to get paved. We need to do a special improvement district, and we need to get this through as much as we can, even if some people are going to be kind of grumpy. But considering what that potential grumpiness could be. We wanted to make sure you guys have your eyes wide open when you're giving us this direction. Is
Yeah.
that pretty fair?
Yeah, and I would say even beyond grumpiness, what the financial impact to certain property owners would be, because in some cases it's substantial and it's frankly probably more than the property is worth. So I do want to just kind of put that out there right at the beginning. So what we did with these 3 different streets, we ran through 3 different funding scenarios. So the first is kind of the traditional, where all the property owners would together, they foot the entire bill, essentially. So what we would have is a 20-year bond. So all of that, let's say a project costs $1 million upfront. You have some interest on top of that. Typically, essentially, your interest is going to double the overall cost. It's kind of a just general rule of thumb. And then over 20 years, that then total $2 million gets paid off proportionally by each property owner.
And then what's consistent for all 3 options, because not everyone's been through the SID with us, is the benefit to the property owners is the city under this one would be issuing the bond. So we have the headache of putting it out to the market, securing it, managing those payments, all of that kind of stuff. When they're paying us back, we have a lien on the property. And so they pay us, I don't know if we have it monthly, quarterly, annually, but we collect payment back. If they don't pay, then that's when we do the lien type of situation. So the city takes the headache of handling the bond. The other thing though, that's consistent for all of these is the city would do the project. So we would put it out to bid, make sure it meets city standards. We're constructing it. It's going to be a city street. All the infrastructure is going to be ours, all of that kind of stuff. So it's not like these property owners are on their own and have to figure out how to finance this, how to construct it, all of that kind of stuff. So that's the benefit of any of these 3 options. Sorry, Deacon.
No, that's great. I appreciate these questions and comments because it's when your head is deep into it, like, some of these things just kind of are not as intuitive. So that's kind of the first option is the traditional approach. The second approach would be where the city essentially fronts the money altogether. So this has the advantage of avoiding a bond and also avoiding any potential interest rates. The downside of that is that you're not spreading that cost over 10 or over 20 years. So there's pretty broad similarities in general between the 10-year city-backed and the traditional approach. But sure.
So if one is 20 and one's 10 years, but the 20-year doubles the price, doesn't it come out to the same?
It's going to come out close. So we're going to show you the numbers. Yeah. We'll show you the numbers.
Yeah.
But the reason it's a 10-year for the city is because we always look at our 10-year plan and we don't have money in our budget to build these streets. And so, but we do have a fund balance as long as it's paid back within that 10 years that we could front it. So that's the key to the 10-year. The 20-year, you guys could give us direction to look at a 30-year or, something like that from a bonding perspective. We just picked what we used last time.
And yeah, just to kind of reiterate the point that if option number 2 was chosen, it doesn't have to go out to a bond, but it also means that it doesn't go out to a bond because it doesn't impact that 10-year fund balance. So it's kind of money in, money out in that 10-year window. And then the third option is half city fronted and then half fronted by a potential street trust fund. Essentially the I guess I
Can
kind
I
of
jump in on this?
I misphrased that.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So philosophically, what you have going on here is when you have dirt roads, what that means is somehow the properties were allowed to develop without having to put in infrastructure that we normally require. And that creates what we have now type of situation. And so when you look at other places where the developer came in, they paid to put in the water and sewer, the stormwater, they pay to put in their portion of the street, they pay to put in the curb, the gutter, all of that kind of stuff, which means when they sell that property, those costs are factored into what they're recouping. So these properties where those costs weren't part of it means that those types of savings have been passed on, kind of philosophically type of situation. And so you have this fairness question of, should we be using citywide taxes for areas that saw benefit because they didn't have to pay for that infrastructure when everyone else had to pay for that infrastructure? And so it's important to kind of understand that there's a bit of that philosophical. But if council felt like, you know what, though, when we look at some of these streets and when we look at connectivity, or when we look at where the distance to schools or different things like that, you may feel that there is a public good to paving the street that goes beyond just the private interest and benefit that would happen just to those specific properties. So this option is going to require you to think if you think that's there. And it's also a little bit of a delay in that we would, when we put together what we want to take to the taxpayers to renew the sales tax, this would be on that list. And so we got to keep that in mind too, on if taxpayers think that's a good use of taxpayer dollars as well. It could be I'm not saying they will or they don't. I'm just saying these are the considerations that you need to think through on this option. Because it could be, you know, if it's close to a school and people are driving on it, that they're like, yeah, we need to get rid of the dirt road type of situation. So the sales tax would pay half of it, which then reduces down what then we would assess to each of individual property. And the city would front then that other part, not issue a bond, because we want to try to avoid the interest. So we would front the other that has to still be paid back in 10 years. So it's kind of a version of number 2 with trying to cut the cost in half type of thing by using the extended sales tax. Does that cover it?
Yeah, that's perfect.
This kind of development isn't allowed now, right? You have to put in infrastructure now, right?
Correct.
Okay, so yes, they do. So for example, right now, we've got the Tierra Azul housing development that's gonna occur and it's gonna be built. And they're going to not front, but part of it is going to be on Foster. But having them pave half a street doesn't make any sense. So what we're doing is having them escrow funds. So once we do pave it, they have the money set aside to pay their portion of it. Other times, if the developer's like on both sides, they put in the street type of thing. So it depends on the development, if we require them to escrow the funds or build it type of situation, because sometimes the development might be smaller or it's not the full street, but we still collect the money for once that construction is going to happen type of thing. Foster just hasn't developed, is part of the reason there. The Stockton needed an emergency annexation because the septic systems in the wells were starting to fail. And so the city went ahead, and there's a lot of discussions. We went after grants. We were able to get some grants. We were able to get them connected to the water and the sewer side, but we made it clear that a special improvement district or something like that would need to happen for the streets, that the annexation did not include the expectation that we're going in and paving the streets. The other area that was annexed in that doesn't have, what do we call that other area? That has the Comanche area. So they've been annexed in, they're still on septic. If their septic fails, they have to connect. They can't redo their septic, but they also have a dirt road type of thing. I will say out of the 3 areas, those ones don't seem to care as much about the road. There's only really been one property owner that's come really close to their septic failing and really had to start exploring some different ideas, but they're managing to hang on. But we'll get to some of those
Okay.
details.
And on our last slide, I think that is something that we should talk about and something that we could use direction on as well, you know, depending on how you all feel about some of the other discussion points. So just in general, is there a way we can turn off those overhead lights? So we've got Comanche, which is right here. Essentially, it's across the highway from Walmart. We've got Foster Avenue. And so what we did was we looked at between West First and West 10th, which is right here. And then there's also Chico. We'll also discuss some of the other sort of tributary roads in that area. But we felt that as we were kind of discussing Chico, that kind of at least helps guide the discussion, you know, to receive more direction. So the elementary school is right here. That's, yeah, so West 8th is right here. West 10th is right here.
That's not covering the road. That's like, that's not covering the dirt road that when you, I can't even.
It would cover the dirt road.
No, it's only, but this is only looking at Foster. It's not looking at any of the west that connect
Okay,
over.
because there's
Correct.
that one dirt road.
There's a section of West 8th that isn't paved. And, you know, that one is also kind of a weird sort of situation because all the properties around it are in the county. So that's kind of its whole other sort of,
Okay.
you know, entanglement. Okay, so this is probably the first map I've ever made where north is right, it's not up. So it's a little bit confusing to get your bearings. Walmart would be like kind of right over here. The WSB building is right over here. And so Comanche Road is, you know, it's a very long road. And traditionally there are three siblings. So there's this tract here that isn't included in the SID. There's this very long skinny tract, which is essentially 50% of the ownership. And then on the other side, there's a number of properties and most of the development is on that opposite side. Okay, so, you know, essentially all the builds of these roads is pretty, you know, consistent with everything else. Curb, gutter, sidewalk. You know, it's a half mile of road, and one of the challenges is when we look at the ownership, there's not a whole lot of different owners to spread out the cost. So, you know, you have one property owner on the right-hand side of the road that was on the bottom of the map, and they essentially have to cover half the cost of that entire road. And so when we look at, you know, that half mile road, I mean, it's, you know, about 1.2, $1.3 million for that half mile of road. So when we go through these different options, you know, so the first option, that this is essentially where they're all, you know, footing it themselves over a 20-year period. When we group by the different owners, the lowest annual payment for one of the property owners would be $4,100 a year. The highest annual payment for the other would be $68,000 a year. So that's essentially that property owner on the other. It's one parcel. There's a house, actually there might be two houses on it and kind of a lot of Chico. It's really kind of a funky sort of development. Right. So, you know, I mean, and that's every year for 20 years. That's a $68,000 bill. And it's and I think it's probably helpful to maybe backtrack a little bit about the history of Comanche. So now when we annex property, we are very diligent that the annexer has a plan and has the means to fund the sorts of improvements that we would require for annexation, because we don't want to get stuck in this situation. This, the parent that had owned this property also owned the Gateway Business Park. And originally that's where Walmart was going to locate. And so all of this was kind of annexed at the same time. And, you know, sort of the assumption was that the profit from the Walmart development and selling the land would be what they would use to build the road and install the water and sewer. As we all know, Walmart isn't there. And so, you know, sort of that plan all kind of fell apart. And so it does cause, you know, this situation, you know, about 25 years later, where we're looking at half a mile of road, no water, no sewer, and really only a handful of owners.
Are they pushing to have this paved?
I think more their push they have not pushed, except for one property owner. They've really pushed for the water and sewer. And about a year ago, we did run the numbers for just that. And it's, it's still pretty costly. I don't have those memorized though, what those
So
are.
these numbers include water and sewer too?
They include water and sewer.
Now I'm with you.
Thank you. So the city-backed
Oh,
option.
Can we
I'm
go
sorry.
back? Okay,
Uh,
there you go.
The city-backed option, so this is, this is really helpful for you to see that it's really not that much difference whether we put it out to a bond and there's a 20-year, sort of payout or a 10-year sort of payout. The lowest payment for the one individual owner is $3,700 per year. The highest per year would be $62,000. And that would be $62,000 over 10 years. So, the overall impact is certainly less, but $62,000 per year for 10 years is a lot of money.
And so the only reason we're bringing this one to you tonight, because the question is, if they're not pushing on it, why are we even looking at it? Is we don't want to have to piecemeal this. And so you can give direction for the different areas, but we don't want to in 2 years be coming back to you with direction on, do we want to do an SID at Comanche or not, if they approach us. And so that's why we're including this tonight, but they have not been pushing us to try to get a road. Maybe. Now Harry's turning his light on, so.
Well, I think another thing to consider is they are all on wells and septics out there. Their well water isn't very good and they will start failing here in the future. So at that point, it puts the city in a tough position. Do we mandate they, front this cost to bring in water and sewer, or do we de-annex them, or how do we get the service for basic needs to them? What does that look like?
And I will say, when we did have the one individual who thought his septic might be failing, those are the options we gave him, which is get your neighbors to agree to do an SID and we'll help you with it. Or you can somehow pay for it some other way, or you can de-annex. But we're not going to let them put in more septics or wells type of situation.
Did you say one of the choices is to de-annex?
Mhm.
So they could actually choose to,
Get out of the city.
and you may have covered this and I didn't catch it. Why did we annex them?
So it was done kind of all with the Adcock or the Gateway Business Park for the new Walmart that was supposed to go in at that time.
I have a question. Is the highest property owner, the individual who annexed out the rest and sold off the rest of the smaller properties?
So, yeah, if we can go back to the map, it's a little bit of a bizarre situation. So, I don't think if we were, I hate to use this, but I'm going to use this, the term blame. These three descendants are essentially blameless in this situation. So it was the parent who made this decision about 25 years ago, and their 3 children then inherited this one tract. Another one inherited that tract, and then the daughter inherited this tract. She kind of split it up, at that time. And then the other 2 brothers have, solid.
So
But
the
when
top-
you-
the top's different owners, right?
Yes, the
They bought
top
off
is,
different-
or some of them might be the same, but they're subdivided. They're
Yeah.
different parcels.
And it's a little hard to see on this map, and we can certainly share it with you all. So I'm gonna cheat and use my screen. So this is the Harvey G. White Life Estate and Michelle Mizukami.
Mhm.
This next property is Harvey White and Michelle Mizukami. The next one is Shirley White Life Estate. Shirley White Life Estate. Shirley White Life Estate. Harvey G. White Life Estate and Michelle Mizukami. So it's essentially the grandchildren of it, but it's really all still the same family. There's only a handful of owners of
Okay.
that property. Yeah, so there is a house actually, some of them are duplexes. There's a house here, 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 and here. And then there's a house here, there's an auto shop here, and there's another house that's actually kind of right there.
But as far as how an SID works, regardless of who the owners are, but it's important to know some of them own multiple ones. But what, per linear foot, we would take each parcel. And so we take the total cost and then whatever percentage their linear foot is, or there's some other ways you can do it. They're assessed their proportional cost. So if someone, say if they only owned one lot, you know, those on the west, since we're kind of turned around, they're smaller lots. So their proportional cost is going to be smaller. That 68,000 or whatever is that one that's to the east, that one really big parcel, right?
Correct.
So that's the big one as far as the price
But
tag,
some of the smaller ones are owned
by the
by
same
the same.
people.
And if I remember right in the beginning, they're not allowed to vote if it's a trust or
You're exactly right.
So
So
this
if it's a
could
life
get-
estate or a trust.
this could get very, very complicated there because even if, say that, no matter what the size is, I agree, but they won't just be paying 3, it'll be times however many, and then not even be able to vote. Yeah, so I think, are they? I thought
The
it
life
said
estate
not.
can? In our past discussions, well, we can circle
I
back to
just was
that.
wondering, because I thought I
In our
heard that.
past
at the beginning.
discussions, you had told me that they don't get a vote in a life estate. That's okay.
Estate is just the person who owns it for their span of their lifetime.
Got it.
One of the things to
Okay.
think about too is, as you look at the bottom property, it's 68,000 roughly annually for whatever year the term is, 20 or 10. But on the west side, the upper, there's maybe 4 owners there. So each one of them for each property would be responsible for that 3,800 or 42. So it's multiplied. If they have 5 properties, they'll have that times 5.
I do have it on my end, a separate spreadsheet linked. So just for sake of discussion, the cheapest property set 3,700. This is the city-backed cost. It is owned by Demi Mizukami and Mason and Leisha McFarland. So, but if you look at a different property, that one is grouped by ownership. It's a $12,000 a year payment owned by Demi and Mason Mizukami. So the ownership is really complicated, but that $3,700 a year is not a true individual's cost, I suppose. It's even higher than that. Yeah.
Question, if they're de-annexed, are they allowed to do another septic and well?
It gets a little bit tricky because then they got to now meet the county guidelines. So they may be able to get creative and change some of their lot lines to create bigger lots that would meet the minimum requirement set by the county. The county might have a variance, but yeah, it'll put them also put them in a difficult spot where they'd have to start that conversation. How do they overcome that? So.
No,
On this one, I guess, has somebody talked to them and said, okay, you've got some hard decisions to make. What is your choice? Or I mean, either way, you're gonna be spending money.
So we we haven't talked to every single property owner, but we talked to Shirley and then, what was his, Rodney. Rodney was the one whose septic was getting ready to fail. He just didn't want to pay it and he just wanted to be able to put in a new septic. So he didn't like his options. He was pretty frustrated. If push came to shove, my guess is he probably would have tried to de-annex is my guess. Cause I don't think Shirley or the others, he did try talking to him and he told us no one else was interested in it, I believe is how that conversation went. And Shirley definitely wasn't interested in it. Her stuff's working and she's fine type of thing.
So what this sounds like as well from the beginning of the conversation when you were talking to us about what all this was, there's a potential that even if we said, oh yeah, let's do it, you know, that the vote wouldn't go our way anyway, because if 50% vote would nix the whole thing. So we're really for this property just discussing whether or not we push for it to even go in front of them as voters.
Yeah, do you want us to spend any staff time even reaching out to this group, I guess is the question. Okay, let's move on.
Okay. We wanted to, I guess I did break, can you advance one slide? I'm sorry. This is really just the quick look at the ownership and how the costs break down. So you know, we don't have to beat a dead horse, but this is just kind of a quick snapshot of
What
how that
question
is.
for you? Is Rodney an official owner on any of this stuff?
Not to our knowledge, no.
Thank you.
There's some complicated dynamics on that road. Okay, so we started with probably the easiest one to discuss first. Yes. Okay, so the next one that we're gonna look at is Foster Avenue. Again, north is right. And so Montano Azul Park is here and the Foster Water Tower's here. The car dealership's up here. So just to kind of get a sense of where everything is. Counselor Hensley, the school is off the map down here. So this one has its own sort of little tricky sort of scenarios. Some of the properties you can see are not within city limits. So those are the ones that have sort of the orange sort of outline underneath. And so that just adds a little bit of a complication to the process, you know, getting the county's buy-in. The other sort of difficult aspect of this is that it's also quite a bit of property that's owned on the one side, and it's owned by a corporation, not an individual. So, you know, from an equity standpoint or just a discussion standpoint, these people would be included probably if the county consented to it. They wouldn't get a vote, but they share essentially, you know, quite a bit of the property, over almost 50% of the property within that
I have a
SID.
question.
Yes, sir.
Why aren't LLCs and businesses allowed to vote? If Oh, okay. So what if that person lives in the area or no?
Like the business owner might live somewhere
Mhm.
in the city limits, but they're not,
In that one
that's
area?
not where they're living personally.
And it's not under their
Their
name.
name.
They could
Oh, okay.
hypothetically put it under their own personal name, I would assume, and then,
Okay,
yeah.
all right.
Okay, so that's just kind of a little lay of the land. The other sort of aspect, just to kind of discuss, there are a handful of single-family homes right here that were part of a past CRHDC development, and then the new Tierra Azul, oh shoot, my thing is dying, is right there. And so Heather alluded to it earlier. This is a portion that they would be responsible for, even though they don't own both sides. But again, it doesn't make sense to build just a portion of one block. So that's a situation where we'd have them escrow it.
Question for you. What segments of this dirt road are owned by the county?
Or in the county
Or
or,
both?
Yeah, so this short stretch right here
Yep.
is essentially the county's maintenance jurisdiction.
Yep.
The rest of it is ours.
Thank you.
so when Deacon was talking about like unknowns and things like that, you can start imagining, so if we build a road and for those properties that are to the east undeveloped, where would they subdivide? Where do we put curb cuts? Where do we put the breakouts for the water lines, the sewer lines? Those, like, it's challenging type of situation. The other is when you see that white stuff on there, that's because of the water, the groundwater, the elevation, all of that. And so honestly, for some of us, we're not sure this is even developable land type of situation. And if it is going to be made developable, they're going to have to invest a significant amount of money to bring up the elevation, to bring in foundations, all of that type of situation. And so I think Deacon had made a comment in the beginning that some of this, they're going to be paying more for this road than the property's worth type of situation.
Yeah, 100% correct. It's certainly a complicated situation, for sure.
But I believe those who are contacting city council are those single family homes. This is a dirt road where people are trying to get off of Craft to avoid some of the traffic or the school buses or things like that. It's kicking up dirt. for those private residences, type of situation. And then obviously for the area that fronts the park is the section Deacon was talking about where the city would pay its portion.
Correct. One other thing, I don't want to belabor it too much, from a kind of an equity standpoint as well, when we talk about, well, where do we put the curb cuts? We philosophically, we try to limit as many cuts as we can into the road, because as soon as you cut it, you pretty much destroy the road. And if this is still being paid off by, the residents who live here, and this person doesn't have a plan until year 6 or 7 and the road gets cut, essentially everyone is still paying on a road that is now deteriorating more rapidly due to, a later decision that's being made. It's not the end of the world, but I think one of the things that we think about is the equity aspect of that, where if someone is, if these residents are paying for this street and then all of a sudden it gets cut in half and it starts, deteriorating, that may not be the most just thing.
And I do want to make it, since we do this through Zoom and record it now, the mayor is abstaining from this portion of the discussion because as someone who works with CRHDC, if you guys were to try to give us direction to where it involves the city paying a portion of it, that would reduce the responsibility of CRHDC. There could be a financial benefit. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Okay, so council, I apologize that I was late to tonight. I had interviews in center, but I am just thrilled. I'm like jonesing that we're having this discussion. I have been bringing this up for years. So first of all, thank you, Heather and Deacon and Harry, for bringing this to the forefront so we can talk about it. I got a text message from a gentleman who lives, he's one of the single family home owners, Ernesto Lopez. I think he knows many of you here, probably reached out to many of you before. He has been on me for years about getting that thing developed and paved in that. And then I had another family reach out to me that this West 8th that turns into a dirt road. Not that one,
That's West 8th.
I thought that was 10th.
10th is down here.
Okay.
10th is paved.
Well, okay, my fault. So we have a lot of students who walk from the elementary school to that development, and they're walking on a dirt road. It's not safe, or they cut through the Chicos, and there's trash and there's stuff back there. And so I just
So
want,
Liz had asked about that.
okay,
early-
let me finish.
Okay.
I just want to add to the story that, because I think it's important, that there are families in this neighborhood who've reached out to me that it's not safe for students walking
That's
through
not
all this.
covered. That's not gonna be part of it.
So that's not part of this and part of,
I know,
okay. It's all in the county, all the properties on that part of it.
I thought you were saying as they were walking, that you were hoping this would help them, but so it's not gonna help them. Okay.
So the reason I moved over to a microphone, I just wanted to clarify something on voting. Voting is different than signing a petition. I think that a business or a corporate owner probably could sign a petition, but which is what is required, either a petition of more than half of the properties to be assessed would allow us to create the district, or an objection by more than half of the properties who don't want to be assessed would prevent us from creating the district. I think businesses could participate in that. What they can't participate in is a vote on issuance of a bond. Just wanted to clear that up.
That's good.
I have a question. So is it realistic? So obviously the houses that really want this is that little block area with all the little yellow squares. And obviously you wouldn't just, could you potentially just pave?
That's, Harry, if you want it, but that's not something you're going from paved, a section of paved to dirt, and like the way the water could like
Okay,
get down underneath it,
it's happening on 8th Street, so I just thought I would ask.
So I think what Heather's meaning is the section to your right is unpaved still, so we would have to go from the end of the pavement. You can see just to the right of the yellow squares there, and have to carry that to West 8th, I guess, at some point, but that is, I mean, it's possible, but you would, I don't know the benefit without taking it further.
Okay.
So
What do
we can stop it anywhere. We just don't want to just.
But
go
we don't
partial.
want to just, we wouldn't just do a little paving in front of those
Right.
houses. So it wouldn't be dirt paved, dirt paved.
So we're really looking, if we even decided to stop, we'd still want to pave that side.
To connect down to where
Yeah.
Jeff Martinez finished his, or
Okay.
up to, yeah.
What do we do for dust mitigation, Harry, on that dirt stretch?
Pretty much nothing, to be honest.
Could we do things
We-
for
we-
dust mitigation?
We've looked at mag chloride. It's
Mhm.
it's a treatment process. The first year you go and put it on heavy and then every year it's a retreat. It does help a lot. Trying to get a company down to the valley to do that. It's either really expensive for our small amount of work or try to combine it with something maybe the county's doing. Mineral County does participate in it every year. So we've tried a few times to coordinate. It just hasn't fallen through.
I'm curious what I know you're probably gonna talk about this next, but what's the cost to these people on that one block? To do the
Yeah.
whole,
We can jump right into it. Perfect question.
I want
Um,
to say something really, I want to apologize to Jan. I wasn't trying to cut you off, so I apologize for cutting you off. I thought it was something you had missed, and so I was just trying to catch you up, and so I apologize.
I appreciate that. I was just trying to add to the story and I recognize that that's a county owned piece of road that I get that. I'm just adding to the story that you have kids who are walking on dirt roads into that whole neighborhood, not just that one stretch of block.
So I just think from a responsiveness perspective, if we want to direct them to the county is like, instead of you continuing to have to get those concerns from those property owners, that's a discussion they need to have with their county representatives.
So I'm not gonna go through all the ins and outs of what the street would look like. Really, most of these are gonna be the same. Essentially, that stretch is looking to be about $2 million. Reason that is slightly less is because there's less infrastructure underground that would need to be installed, unlike Comanche. So that's, even though it's a bit longer, there's less infrastructure underneath. So RMI, which is that property in the county, they own a total of 30% of the frontage. And so they would have an annual cost under the first sort of most expensive option of $66,000 per year for 20 years. The individual single-family homes, those are looking to be under the most expensive option, just under $2,700 per year for 20 years. I'm sorry.
my concern is, well, I know people in that neighborhood too, and I mean, can they even afford that every single year? It's kind of crazy.
I have a question. I mean, we're allowed to talk about this, right? We're not supposed to
Absolutely.
keep moving, do we?
Absolutely.
Okay. I keep going back to the developers. CRHDC, for example, it's almost like the same thing that happened with the Adcock scenario with that dirt road. I think the hardest part, I think this is a no-brainer. When you present this to the homeowners, they're not gonna care about dirt no more. I really truly feel that way. Now, from Jan's perspective and from our perspective, as far as safety goes, for kids, when we're gonna start a whole nother development, right? Can you go back to the map real
Sure.
quick? A whole nother one right up to the left, right over there, right? Isn't it the same scenario as all the rest of it?
Yeah, it's certainly, I think it's a spot on question. What we do have in the potential development is the connection at least to the park. But as far as getting it to the school, and really this will play into our future discussion as well, is it really is a cost benefit analysis. I mean, if you're talking, sidewalks about installed $80 a foot, $100 a foot, kind of what we're paying if we're contracting it out.
It's a little bit less than that.
Okay.
Yeah, quite a bit, but yeah.
So let's say $50 a foot. Let's say we can acquire the right of way to connect it. That's still a substantial cost. Not saying we can't explore it. One of the things is, I think we have to ask ourselves is it fair to put that onto the development and the developer? And then what is the cost? If the cost means that we have less housing and we're kind of stuck in that sort of
Well,
cycle, I don't know.
Even if the cost wasn't put on the developer, but when you sell that home, whether you're developer A or B, letting the buyer know that, look, this is why the road isn't paid. This is why your loan's so low. Because we know we've had this conversation before. I think it was me and Heather around when what is it, 6? I understand their loans might have been lower because there was no street. And I think if they really were reaching out, see the numbers to this, I think it would go away. But now we're stuck with the direction of, do we want to do something about this? And if we do, then it puts them back in it, right?
Well, and some of your direction could be though, no matter what, if you want us to move forward, we need to have conversations, right? And so we just need to know how strongly do you want us to be pushing this with those conversations type of thing, and which options you're open to. To the concept of, putting the cost on a developer for their development to connect to a school that's a few blocks away because there's empty land. I mean, some of this is when you have a school built in the middle of nowhere, getting connection from a walking perspective is going to be challenging for any development type of thing. But it's obviously something we can talk about if we feel like there is a city need from a safety perspective to somehow make a connectivity there. I don't know if I would say that it's equitable to put it on one developer.
I think Carson has his hand raised. Carson has his hand. Go ahead, Mike.
Hello, so just for clarification, I heard you tell Jan that the people in the yellow, the individual homes, and Heather, I'm asking you, that they should contact their county rep. Now, the county rep, okay, so I guess my question is the CRHDC development area, is that?
So, Michael, so no, not those yellow homes. It would be the property owners or anyone who's worried about the kids walking on 8th. So if anyone has concerns about kids walking on 8th, they should contact the county. Because that connection on 8th to the school district, that section of 8th is in the county.
Oh, okay, thank you. I got you. Now I understand.
Okay.
So just to kind of skip to we'll go to the next slide if we can, please. The half street trust fund, half city, those lowest annual payment for the single family homes is $1,100 per year.
For how many years?
For 10 years.
Okay.
So that's if half of it is covered by the street trust fund and half of it is fronted by the city where they're paying the city back over 10 years. So, I think we're starting to get at least into some numbers that are more feasible. I didn't go through it on this presentation, but I did do the research probably about a year ago about why was this not paved, and it came back to the fact is it doesn't make sense to have a 300-foot paved section surrounded by dirt road, and so and then the discussion at the time from the public works director at the time was that SID option would be the most appropriate for the owners, but here we are kind of in this cycle.
And how long ago was that decision made?
When that subdivision was done, I think it was 2005.
Okay.
It was before the school went in was part of it. They
For sure.
chose to put the school out in the middle of nowhere.
Okay, so, again, thank you for all these figures and that. It's finally good to see this. Can you go back to the map once, please? So I think, and I've mentioned this before, but I think we should get everybody to the table. The county, those homeowners, the Martinez family, there's that one sliver there who's owned by someone else, even the school district and Ty's group, and say, there's so much more development going into this area. it would be in everybody's interest to come together and get this Foster paved. And the main reason being is that we have all this new housing coming in. And surely all those groups of people would say, yeah, we got to do this. That's my thought.
Are we wrapping up? Before we move on to the next SID, are you done with this one, Deacon? Because I want to ask some probing questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I think what would be helpful is when we have those discussions, do you guys have a preference between the bonding and the repayment in 10 years? I'm not asking the street trust one yet. My impression is you wouldn't care on either of those two options, but I want to test and make sure that's a correct assumption. If they're interested in the bonding for 20-year payment, versus they have to pay it back in 10 years. I think they'd be interested in the 10-year because it's cheaper, but do you care either way?
I think the 10 years, I mean, obviously it's still a big amount of money, but it still shaves some off. I know when I'm on a budget, sometimes that $400 would make a difference. So I guess I just feel probably the city back would be the better, but if for some reason it was close between the two, I'm fine.
Okay, and then my next question is offering the half street trust fund versus half city backed, is that an option you want us to put on the table? Because I don't want to offer it if city council's not interested in offering that.
For me, I think the cheapest thing for the people that live there would be the most logical one to present to them as a choice.
Okay, so I have mixed feelings. So on the Comanche, I don't feel like that lower price should be brought in because honestly, when we put this to the voters for the street tax, there's only those people that use the Comanche area. So people are gonna say, why are we paying all this money for something that's not really a high priority? Because remember when we had the street group, there is no way they would have put that as a high priority. Now, the only reason why I might be more inclined, and so I still want to think it through, is Foster is becoming a main road. And so for me, I see Foster as potentially being something that actually a lot of taxpayers may say, hey, that actually rises to being one of the ones we should be paving or keeping up anyway. So that's, I guess, where my thoughts are going at the moment.
And I agree with you, Liz. I don't believe we should even approach Comanche at all, to be honest, and put our efforts into Foster Avenue because I can see the growth in 10, 15 years. And it's almost an investment for the city to do something with Foster. Thank you.
Any other feedback? Michael, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, and again, I'm sorry too. I'm still working, guys, so I'm doing both things. So for the tax, is it all three of the, or I guess whichever ones of the developments or the SID sign on or decide that they're going forward, all three of those would be eligible for the street, this is a new street trust fund tax. Are they eligible for that? Are they all eligible for it? Or do we have to do a different one? Like a different, I guess we wouldn't do a different one, but that money would be usable by all three is what I'm trying to say.
I think what we were envisioning was, when we kind of do a similar process for the extension of the street sales tax, we would obviously pull together like a committee where you guys appoint it from every ward and all of that and talk through all of that. But obviously then that gets recommended to council. And so we would present this if this is something council's interested in, that part of the extension of the sales tax, one of the projects that would be listed would be paying for half of paving of Foster, with the other half being reimbursed by the property owners. And from a staff perspective, we felt that kind of would create a good balance from that philosophical perspective of they saw the benefit of, for those homes that are there, they saw the benefit of not having to pay for those costs, whereas everyone else, when they bought their home, had to pay for those costs type of thing. So that's why we didn't recommend the street trust fund paying 100% of it.
No, and I kind of caught that. I knew I had missed that part. I meant though, is this, and I guess I'm trying to pay attention, but is this option with the street paying half, it's on every one of the SIDs, right?
It's presented as an option. It's not presented as something city or that staff would recommend on every option.
Okay, I got you. And I'm clear, but I'm sorry, I'm looking at two screens and it's a little boggling. I apologize. I'm tired.
I think with Foster, with the amount of traffic they see because of the closeness to the school is probably where you start to tip those scales as it relates to that balance from a philosophical perspective, from a staff opinion.
And when we
Thank
did
you.
the Street Trust Fund Committee, some of their decision points revolved around connecting schools. So that was usually a high priority for the group.
The other significance of the city paying half through the street trust fund is that the caveat that allows the owners of half the property to object and therefore kill a special improvement district does not apply if the city is paying for half or more of it. So you would take it out of it would be a more foolproof way to form a district. Half the owners couldn't put the kibosh on it.
Well, I guess I want to be careful to force owners.
Well, so that's it. So we could start nice conversations and all of that, but it's good to know what our options are. So if we don't pay half, then if more than 50% don't want it, they can kill it, type of thing. And so when you look at how much property just some of those own and that it's gonna be more than what their property's worth, there's a high likelihood that could happen. If we do this, it could go through, like, we will get it paved then.
So let me ask you this. Let's say somebody truly can't afford to pay their part. What happens
We
then?
put a lien and we'll, at
And if
the
they
end of
ever
the
sell
day,
the property,
we end up,
then they would pay off the lien and then.
or
get-
we end.
No, it would go to a tax sale.
Oh, okay.
They'd lose their property if they didn't redeem that lien.
Okay.
And one of the kind of final discussion points when I show you the map of the elevations is, again, some of these properties, I'm specifically
You go
thinking
back home.
of the RMI properties where they're gonna have a substantial bill no matter what, $30,000 a year, versus 60, still very substantial. But these properties, probably aren't worth that much, especially over 10 years. So then what do we do with these sorts of properties? I mean, I think based on some of council's past discussions, I think I would say that you all would want to work with the folks who live in these homes. But when you have these huge vacant tracts that don't have much commercial value, they don't have much development value, it's a tough decision.
So you're gonna say we own it, probably. We're gonna own that property and then obviously have to eat another 30,000 a year. Okay.
I was just gonna comment on the safety aspect, having Foster paved, it would alleviate a lot of traffic on West 10th. So, I think just from the safety aspect of the kids, maybe walking to school and stuff, they're gonna be using Foster instead of the West 10th and,
That is true, but it also could create a different problem at the elementary school because they're still all going to one point, and it could end up is a different problem for them versus what they currently have. So there'll be more routes, but they're still going to one.
okay, I see what you're saying.
If you had conversations with these people, how would you do that? Would it be?
I would think one-on-one probably to start out with. And because I think the message for each of them is maybe slightly different. Those that are the small property owners that live there and are dealing with the dust and, and all of that. I think their interest is coming from a different perspective than the person who, has property and they're not sure they're ever going to make any money out of it. And we're talking about a pretty high price tag. So I think that conversation's a little different. If we can get people interested in all of that, then we can start having some of those group type of meetings. But I think coming to a meeting where there's a lot of people and being presented with a price tag of 30,000 could be a bit shocking. Like a calmer situation or a safer environment I would recommend.
And I would recommend explaining every scenario like you did to us, like, we will take your property if you don't pay. Like, if you say that, they might understand it and listen better. I think a lot of people, it sounds to me like some of them think it is your job or our job to pave this, right? When you look at what it really looks like, it might change. I mean, and I grew up in dirt roads. I mean, taking a gamble on losing my home and eating dirt, I'll tell you what, I'll eat dirt any day. And I think some of these families would say, all right, maybe we need to be not, I mean, because you need to understand what it consists of. I don't think they see this piece. So I'm just like, if they were here right now, it would probably look different. It would probably, and some of them would what would you say, de-zone themselves out of city? I mean, it would take another turn, I think.
Well, and I'm not sure we can allow that for this one. I mean, I guess we
No,
can
not this one, the
technically,
last
but
one.
yeah,
Yeah.
the last one.
Yeah, I think when they hear stuff like this, for me, in my new role as being a city councilman, and maybe, I don't know if you all felt this, but for instance, if Rodney comes up to me, I mean, if he was sitting right here, he'd probably say, oh, never mind, I'm out of here later. Sorry, like, they would stay out of your guys' way. Me as a community member, like, I'm at home right now, I'm fixing some stuff because I don't want you to take my house.
So
Like,
my,
it's really, they need to hear all them pieces and understand, because right now they think it's our job just to fix this stuff. And from my comment earlier from developers, I don't expect a developer to cop a bill. That's why my first question before I even got through half this was, is this still allowed to happen like this? Because if it is, we're gonna be here in 10 years figuring it out why them kids are eating dirt. So I guess if that's fixed, then we just need to hash out these last few areas that.
so my question to you guys then, kind of going on the path you started us on, so say if we meet with individual property owners first, because those are the ones that have been the most vocal in reaching out and the ones experiencing the dirt. If them looking at these price tags, even with the best case, this, the sales tax with the street, and they back off, then is council good with us not pursuing the conversations any further? Or is it something that then you still want us to talk to the large property owners? You still want us to really hammer on this?
Could you, okay, could you remind me, so the cost was 2 million to do the whole road, that's what the cost is. Will you remind me how much tax we get from the street tax approximately a year?
I think right now
1.7?
it's about 2.
2?
I think
So I
with the
guess
inflation
if
and
the-
everything.
So this is just my personal opinion. If those homeowners are not even open to this, I think personally, then when we potentially get the next street tax passed, is we have a committee and they rank them. And if Foster rises to the ranking, then obviously we will look at it from that perspective.
Okay, so let me make sure I'm hearing let me repeat back to make
Yeah.
sure I'm understanding it. So the conversation would go like this. Best case scenario,
Mhm.
if you guys are interested and we can get other property owners interested, council would be willing to offer this half street trust fund, half, here's what your cost would be looking like. But you need to understand the seriousness of getting into this type of situation, because if you default, this is a new annual payment. If you default, here's what that process
Right.
looks like. And then but if you decide you're not interested, then we're not paving it type of situation, and it goes up like any other street for consideration the next time we're looking for an extension, and there's no guarantees
Yes.
if it's selected to be paved. Is that what you're saying?
Mhm. That's because then it gets fair. And like I say, I would assume as the years go on, I'm making an assumption, but I want it then like we've done is all different neutral parties, or I thought it was really fair how it happened last time where they walked around. I'm assuming this is probably going to continue to rise to the level of eventually being paved. But I feel like then that would be the way to do it. And it falls into the whole city as far as where's the ranking go, and then it comes to us and then we make that decision. That's my personal. That way then it really is part of the tax. It's then part of that none of the homeowners, if they didn't want to be part of this, then it just goes, and so whenever that right time happens, it'll happen, and just do it that way.
And then Dawn, I think you had your, and I wasn't sure of Michael, so yeah, I wasn't sure of the order. Is Michael next?
Yeah, I'll say Michael's next.
Okay, Michael, we're saying you're next.
Okay, so two things, I guess, just to play, not devil's advocate, but just, I guess, to try to understand. So are we saying that we're gonna ask the whole city to vote on a street tax, and then we're gonna ask these people to vote on it would all have to be one vote, right? And we would have to be, I guess my question is that application fair in the way we've done it in the past? And should those SID areas be eligible for street trust fund tax if they fall into that SID, category? I think they're quite different, because you have like individual property owners, and I'm not trying to be, harsh in any way, but you have one property owner benefiting or reaping from this huge area, and then you have, I don't know, I guess I'm thinking about it weird, and I think it's a little different. So correct me if I'm wrong, please. I may be just looking at it differently. I think they're two different scenarios or applications.
Well, and so I don't know if I 100% followed you, but let me take a stab. So, I think for a timing perspective, like what needs to come first is before we finalize, because last time, if you remember, council actually did a resolution that set out every street that the tax would pay for, and we did it in 3-year increments, so people knew the timing of it. And then when we took the vote to the voters, it had the language that locked in that resolution, so people knew what they were voting on. So before you guys craft that resolution and list one of these SIDs, we will have already needed to do a lot of work with the property owners to make sure that they're, in favor of it. We can still force it, but I think council's, wants us to make it that they're in favor of it. And that they know they're paying the other half over 10 years type of situation. So we would want to make sure all of that's secured and kind of done before we take it to the voters.
Because that's
I
a
guess-
separate vote, right? With ballots just to those individual homes.
Well,
am I
we don't
wrong?
have to, no, the only reason we'd have to do a vote for those specific homes is if we're issuing a bond. So for the option where the street sales tax is paying half and the city fronts the other half and has it paid off in 10 years, we don't have to issue a bond for that. So it doesn't technically require them to vote, but they could do a petition to say they don't want to do it. But since we're paying half of it, that petition would not carry any weight. It just politically would be up to council if they want to push it.
And then also my other point was, from an equity standpoint, is it fair to jump this new development ahead of, to go back to some of Charlie's history, again, ahead of the neighborhood where Charlie had been asking for pavement for 30 years?
Well, so we are going to get to the Stockton. So we'll finish Foster, and I'll put a pin in that part of your question, Michael, and then we'll talk Stockton. And then at the end, we can find out if there's interest in both Foster and Stockton, if there's a priority, I guess, between them type of thing.
Thank you.
So they have their lights on, but maybe, I guess what I'm starting to think now is maybe let's hear the Stockton one, because it feels like maybe we need to hear all of them to then help have the discussion. I don't know, but I don't want to cut any of you off.
Oh, no worries. Was it me or you? I just have a clarifying question. With the last thing that Liz said about the two different options and possibly having Foster naturally rise, bubble to the top. The escrow that the developers have put the monies into escrows to, would that just sit there then?
So without anything happening, the escrows sit there until it's time to build the road.
Would it build interest?
I think the agreement is like they put a certain amount, it might but then also if the costs come in higher, they have to make up the difference. If the costs come in lower, so it's like there's an amount there as the best guess based on our current numbers type of thing. But if the costs come in higher, they have to pay it. But if you guys approve using the street trust fund to pay half of it, that would reduce down their portion as well.
Okay. All right, thank you.
I wasn't sure if that's what you were getting to.
It was. I was just making sure that we would still have that money in escrow in case we decided to wait. So thank you.
And that does certainly present maybe another sort of struggle that we've had in certain situations where, the cost of construction just is so fast as far as the escalation. And, that is sort of a situation we found ourselves with Monroe Avenue and Dr. Patterson's apartments, where a $50,000 letter of credit that doesn't buy you 200 feet of sidewalk. No, I mean, it does, but you get what I'm saying. And if you wouldn't mind, Holly, going back to the map, just one quick time. Counselor Dominguez, I think you've put your finger on a very important question. And so I want to point out this sort of blocky L-shaped parcel, because that also kind of factors into some of the broader discussions and considerations. So just kind of tuck it in the back of your mind that we'll talk about that one as well. Okay, so Chico, this is certainly, I think, one of the more complicated ones because there's an awful lot of history. There's a lot of residents, and it's also just kind of more complicated from an infrastructure, from a property ownership, and it also impacts the most amount of people. One thing I'm sorry, I jumped the gun on you, Holly. One thing that I just do want to quickly point out is, some of these rights of way are, so Chico is a fairly consistent right of way. I think this is.
You're talking width, right?
Yes.
When you're talking, so it's wide, it's a normal width.
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you. So I think it's under what the city typically requires. I think it's 50 feet. But it's at least enough real estate to build a road on top of. One of the things, just to kind of tuck in the back of your mind is I believe this is Sage. Sage is a 25-foot wide right of way. So essentially that's a little bit wider than a standard alley. This property here, which is Savage, there's a whole portion of it where nobody knows who owns that adjacent property. So it's not that it couldn't be figured out, but it also adds a little bit more confusion. There's also another sort of interesting dynamic here. These kind of purple hatchings are properties that access either Sage or Chico, but they don't actually front it. So, when you're thinking about proportionality of costs, how do you account for these properties that are kind of tucked away in here? They're kind of landlocked, but they have an access easement to get to the road. So they certainly would directly benefit, but they're not actually included in the sort of any sort of cost sharing. So there are a couple little sort of quirky situations. I don't think any of those bear on the larger discussion, but I just wanted to quickly point those out. Okay. One of our struggles with Chico is a lot of these properties are not owned by individuals. So, we've kind of gone down that rabbit hole a little bit. We talked a little bit about the landlocked parcels. So the rights of way width are oftentimes narrow and irregular. At least the one benefit about Chico is it's a standard, I think it's 50 feet wide. So again, that at least simplifies some of the discussion. Again, we kind of run into the challenge of what do we do with vacant properties and how do we anticipate development. Again, we have the question with RMI and Foster Avenue. They also are a big owner. I think it's 20% of this SID. So they also have another large interest in this.
Who's RMI?
It's the Duran family. It's Rocky Mountain Insurance, I think.
The Del Duran's family.
Okay.
So I did want to include some of the history. So, this is something that we go through the minutes, oftentimes, but I think it's worth reminding. So the Stockton addition was an emergency annexation. There were a lot of septic systems that were contaminating shallow wells. And, nobody wants E. coli in their lives. And so city council stepped in and said, we're going to do an emergency annexation so that we can hopefully fix this problem. So in the annexation meeting, there is quite a few residents. There were other meetings that we unfortunately don't have. They're like kind of more community open house meetings that we don't have minutes for. However, in that discussion in 2002, Public Works Director at the time said, yep, the residents are responsible for forming a special improvement district to get the roads. Really, this was just about initially providing the water infrastructure to try to solve that immediate need of people are at risk of getting sick because of contamination. So the city installed the water infrastructure first in 2003. So they used $221,000 enterprise funds. And at the time, the property owners were only asked to contribute the $1,000 tap fee. In 2007, the city was successful in getting a community development block grant and used some matching funds from the enterprise and some in-kind to install the sewer services in the area. And so, one of the things that when we kind of look at the math, there were 43 households, they paid $2,000 apiece, and they got about $500,000 worth of infrastructure. So this one is a little bit more advanced in the sense that they have at least water and sewer, and there's already been somewhat of a sort of parallel situation that we were discussing with on Foster, but these are just some of the sort of histories behind this. Go ahead, Holly. So in this situation, because it's a narrow street, there's no room to put bike lanes, so it's really just curb, gutter, sidewalk, and the I guess it's a 45-foot right of way, and there's a street, so traditional street. Again, I'll just kind of skip through. If we were to look at the city-backed option that doesn't go to a vote, the lowest annual payment is $572 a year. The highest is, again, RMI at $14,900. If we did the half street trust fund option and the half city-backed option, those numbers get cut in half. So we're looking at, for the RMI, $7,500 per year. And, the lowest annual payment for some of those individual properties at $286 per year for 10 years. It's a bit more realistic, for sure. There are some other sort of considerations that, as we kind of tie up some of the other things that are worth considering. I think that the stormwater sewer is particularly challenging in this scenario. It's not unsolvable, but those costs aren't built into this just because we don't have an immediate solution of knowing how to budget for that.
So I have a comment.
Yeah, there's a handful more slides, but if you want to talk about Chico some more, or I can kind of do a few
No, go ahead.
summaries. So this is just a quick sort of recap slide. What we did was we just highlighted the properties that would pay the lowest and the highest and what their best and worst case scenarios are. So again, RMI has a particular challenge with both the Chico and the Foster options. This property, the one that would be paying, I think I've got a typo in there, guys. I'm sorry. That lowest annual cost is wrong on that one. So I'll have to fix that. So it is certainly much more feasible in general. And on Chico. Okay, so again, a point that we don't want to cause unintended consequences and hurt people when we're trying to accomplish something good. What may happen with an SID, especially if you encumber it with a high price tag, is you make properties that are already difficult to develop essentially impossible, because all of a sudden they have to pay a lot of money that they may not be able to, or the property just may not be worth that. And the next slide, this is what I've been kind of promising all night. So this is an elevation relief map. So the dark green are the really low-lying areas. And then, you know, the warmer the color gets, the higher in elevation. So, you know, I left Comanche off of this because there's no problem there. You can see when you look at this, this is a good reason why the Tierra Azul development is here, because you can see it's located on the high ground, so it's a lot easier to build. When we look at the RMI properties here and here, you can see so much of that predominantly green area is on those two specific properties. This right here is a detention pond, a city detention pond. That's also a detention pond. So you can see this is really about as low as it gets in this part of the area. So, you know, I do want to really hammer home the fact that these two properties have a lot of difficulty naturally. And then you also have these two long, kind of skinnier properties that also have a lot of development challenges. Another sort of thing is you'll look right here where Chico is, and I apologize, I should have zoomed in a bit more. These properties here are, you know, kind of that lime green. Again, you know, if we build the road up so that we can make sure we can get drainage and everything, we're going to be putting some people's properties down in ditches. And so, you know, that's one of those unintended consequences. You've got a nice, you know, paved road, but you're living in a puddle. So, you know, I don't say any of these things to try to discourage the conversation. I just really want it to be clear what some of these potential unintended consequences are.
There's a reason that maybe looks this way.
Yeah, and you know, and this is really kind of the last slide, Holly, if you'll go to the next one. So historically, when we look at a lot of Alamosa before Tabor, SIDs were how infrastructure was built. There was a special assessment on properties. You know, we've got files in the 70s and 80s. So many properties got their curb, gutter, sidewalk, and streets by special improvement districts because it was a lot more feasible then. It's a lot less expensive, and some of the rules around it weren't as tight. They also, SIDs really work for generally developed areas where you can split out the cost easily. And so the Carroll SID that Heather mentioned earlier, that one's a lot more feasible because you've got so many owners and it's easier to spread out the cost. When you have these big, large vacant tracts, essentially they're already probably marginally developable anyway, and then they get a huge, you know, financial burden on top of that. And then what do you do when they can't pay? And Councilor Dominguez, I think this is such a really important sort of discussion point. So the standards for new development apply equally. So whether we are approached with a new development in the Stockton edition, or whether it's the Tierra Azul, or if it's River Trace, you know, curb, gutter, sidewalk, road, stormwater, sewer, electricity, blah, 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 blah. It does kind of get us into this weird catch-22 though. So do we end up perpetuating some of these difficult to develop properties because they're really probably marginally developable anyway? And as soon as they have an idea, we're saying, okay, now you got to build the street, you got to build this sidewalk, you got to do this. And then they're back to being vacant and undevelopable. We encountered a similar situation on the tail end of like 14th and Alamosa, where, you know, it was a really kind of tricky thing to maneuver, but as soon as you require the new street, quality of life is much better, but it essentially ends up killing most people's opportunities to make these properties work. And it's a really terrible decision, you know, and there isn't really a good answer. It's kind of a catch-22 in both directions. The property that I wanted to point out on Foster, and actually, Holly, if you wouldn't mind just going back to that Foster map. Keep going, keep going, keep going. This one. So this is a huge parcel, and it has streets on 3 sides. That's paved, this isn't paved. So if they go to develop here, do they end up triggering building this portion of the road? I mean, again, it's a catch-22. I mean, if it's not accessing the road, then, well, there isn't sort of a development impact that's, triggering it. But on the other hand, if I own that property, I would just cut off half of it and never make it developable because it would never pencil out. So it's really a gnarly question that doesn't have an easy answer. But I think it's really important to at least have the conversation, because no matter which decision, it's difficult and it's burdensome for somebody.
And some of that I think is, maybe doing some research on best practices in other communities and some things like that. Doesn't 100% tie into just the SID discussion for tonight.
Right.
Okay. I just want to make sure I'm not misunderstanding something.
Yeah, I think the only reason I'm bringing this up is, if the decision is we do nothing, I think there's pretty good consensus on Comanche. The consensus is, they're on their own. If they go to subdivide or if they go to develop, they trigger all the development improvements. They still can't pay it. And then we're just kind of stuck in this perpetual situation.
Okay.
And so Chico and a lot of the Stockton addition is in a similar situation, and as well as these big undeveloped properties. So, it seems like we end up in the same place regardless. Yeah, it's just, I think, a point that's worth considering. If the discussion is we're not going to pursue an SID, it's going to remain the way it is. It also will probably always remain that way.
So I just wanted to make a comment about people that I talked to in the Stockton area. There's one particular man that owns several properties. And he said, all we want is our roads paved. We don't want curb gutter. And I had that discussion with Heather before, and it doesn't make sense, just to pave a road and not do curb and gutter and that other stuff. But his main concern is, the cost of how much it's gonna cost him for owning all these properties in Stockton. So just wanted to let you know that there are homeowners out there that have that concern because they do own several properties.
When I would say we probably need to have a similar discussion on this Chico as we did with the Foster of, if council's interested in us having these conversations with the property owners and interested in allowing us to offer that where we use the street sales tax type of thing as well.
I think the information is huge, no matter what anybody can or can't do. Because even if you're thinking about buying property, you should probably look at these scenarios. And even for RMI, like maybe they need to hear it so they can start figuring out like, man, what are my options? Like, what does that look like? Sell it or even trade it out for the city or something? Like everybody I think needs to see and hear this whole scenario so they know that we're working on it and we heard them. But 2, this is what it looks like. And then 3, moving forward, like learn from it, like in develop, like that just keeps coming to the forefront. Like if some of these guys have a lot of money when you start subdeveloping an area, always revisit this and say, look, this is a potential, like these homeowners need to know that before they buy into these lots that you might not have a paved road. And this is what it looks like later. Because I don't know if a lot of people can afford. I definitely feel that the city, if their concerns are safety too, and we want to tend to the school district areas, that we do meet them halfway. It makes it a little bit more easier for them certain situations, but I know we would have to have plenty more conversations about priority and where we sit with the safety. I think we need to separate ourselves from the development piece in the beginning, because that already happened but moving forward, I think we can learn to make sure this doesn't happen again. But I obviously, you said that's what's going on. So that's good to know, because it is scary to buy land and then 20 years later, you're like, what?
So what were you gonna answer?
If you don't mind.
No, I'm sorry.
The worst thing that we always hear is, hey, I just bought this property. What can I do with it? That's always, it's a hard discussion. And Holly, if you'll just really quick go back one slide, I just want to point out one particularly tricky one. This one long skinny property, I had a discussion with a real estate agent about it maybe 3-4 weeks ago. It's surrounded on the north by Chico, it's got Savage, and it's got Tremont. So no matter who buys it, if they want to break ground, if they want to develop it, they trigger streets on 3 sides. Which, then, it's just it's a horrible catch-22. And we always love it when people ask us first, because we will point out the roadblocks, miles away if we can.
So hearing the whole thing and all of it, my opinion, and I'm definitely still open, but where I'm going now is I feel that having the discussions, taking Comanche out, but having on the other two, having those really open, honest discussions, letting people know sort of that all these challenges and what doing an SID would trigger it, and just really finding out. I almost feel more that we shouldn't offer the half tax part of it, because then it's almost picking favorites or whichever way it goes. So doing it with, hey, do you want to do this SID? The city would, potentially doing the 10-year. If they don't want to, because there are so many challenges, then it comes back to our committee ranking things. And then if and when each of these areas come up to the ranking, then it's more done on a fair way, in the sense of how they're feeling. And then it just naturally gets done by the city. And so that it doesn't put that expense. Any new construction obviously has to go through the policies. But I think because these somehow fell through or for whatever reason, we sit up and here and argue forever why it happened. But I think then and I totally get so leaving it to them, but I would hate to have somebody be homeless because of a situation where they couldn't afford to do this. And I'm hoping that maybe some of these honest conversations, they're seeing that we're really trying hard and letting them know that if this SID doesn't work for you from an economic, because most of it's going to be from an economic standpoint, is that idea that it still will, you can't make any promises. And obviously the street tax, we have to go through the procedures, but there is a chance at some point then that it could rise to then the city would cover it. But obviously we do have a lot of streets, but just being more that it's an honest versus picking and choosing on our end, which ones would get it. I guess that's how I feel.
Ask a question.
Get Carson first.
Or Michael, if you want to go.
So let's go back to the last slide again real quick, Holly, please. Okay. So considering that last bullet point and thinking about even just thinking about the kids walking to school in the dirt and all that kind of stuff. In an area like that where we have, even some people that are going to have issues paying the SID, whether we fund it with street tax or not. I mean, these are burdens that, we're always talking about equity, and these are burdens that we're going to put on them either way. So just thinking about what the landowner asked Jackie or somebody else, can we do, streets? I mean, we have streets all over town. I have a street here where I paid a ton of money when I developed this land 20 years ago. I paid $5,000 to connect to utilities, and I don't have, a fancy street. I don't have, we had to pay for our sidewalks out of our pocket. And so my point is there a way that we could, as a council, lower the standard a little bit in these areas to promote a little bit of the development, or be a little more lenient, not require the sidewalk and the curb, just to clean up some of the dust or some of the look in these areas, and promote a little bit of that development without putting these, 3 foot down complete rebuilds of these streets into effect. And I'm asking Harry, is there cheaper ways to do streets like, the one in front of the rec center by the parks, these streets that don't have, curb and gutter and all that? I'm just asking, is that something we'd consider, or do we have to be rigid in all these things all the time?
Well, I think it's something that would be, Harry can provide examples on what cost differences it can make when we allow construction to remove curb and gutter and sidewalks and, allow French drains to try to do for stormwater and things like that. But then this is a good discussion for council, because then we're 20 years into the future and it's, well, the city doesn't care about the south side because we don't even put in sidewalks. And so like, that's the stuff it turns into. And we don't even have the same level of streets as the north side. And so that's why
But nobody
we
paid
put-
for my sidewalk. You know
But-
what
well,
I
I'm
mean? So
saying-
coming from a constituent level, I'm not crying about the sidewalk. I mean, I'm not saying that I really want to hear people whining about them not having the sidewalk, because nobody paid for mine. What I'm saying is the street, the pavement part, the middle of the road where the city owns, do we lower the standard a little bit, or require them, like in my neighborhood, as they build their house, they have to pour their own sidewalk. Like in my neighborhood, if every time Habitat builds a house here, they got to pour the sidewalk. When we built our homes, every landowner here has to pour their own sidewalk, and it's 100% out of your pocket. So I don't feel necessarily sorry for them for not having a sidewalk, but little kids walking the street in the dust, walking a dirt road, and that's been going on forever. Because again, it happens, that's been going on right there in Ward 3 forever too, and right here in my neighborhood. These developments where I live are much newer than Charlie's ward. I mean, Jackie's ward. This development's like 20 years old. That one's 40. So I'm just saying, is there a way to do that? Is that something council would consider? If not, it is what it is. I'm just putting that out there.
So I think Comanche, we should just leave that alone. And then Foster, I think, if you had to ask me of the two, which is more priority, I would say Foster, just because it's becoming a major thoroughfare to get people to school. And then I think from here on out, new development the developer should have to pay for the road and the all the stuff. So, but then Mr. Dominguez, you brought up a point of, and I probably missed this in the first 10 minutes, is those 6 houses that are on Foster that are on the dirt road. Did they pay a lower rate knowing, or a lower loan or whatever, knowing that they wouldn't have a road or sidewalk?
So what they knew and didn't know, the chances of them knowing they got a better deal on their property because those costs weren't folded in, I bet they didn't even think about that type of thing. So in the beginning, we did talk a little bit about that philosophy of the reason staff's only recommending using the street trust fund for half of it is because when you look at when other development has happened, the developer had to pay to put in all the water, the sewer, the stormwater, the sidewalks, the road. And when they sell that lot, those costs are wrapped up into it. And so whoever buys the lot and then, and then it's passed on, property changes hands. But those initial costs, the developer recoups it when they sell the lot. So these individuals where it's already been developed, but it doesn't have those amenities, that means they didn't have to cover those costs when they purchased it. But as a layperson, they probably didn't give one thought to that. But before we leave you, I also want to, I didn't mean to give anyone the impression from this discussion perspective that we have to pick between the Chico and Foster. I mean, so if council wants to say, we feel both of these are a priority and both of them we would be open from a street sales tax, that is perfectly fine. That's perfectly fine direction. So we in no way intended to make you feel as if you guys need to pick one over the other. You can give different direction on all 3 of them, type of thing.
Okay. And the reason I asked that question about those 6 homeowners is because just to the west of them, behind them in the cul-de-sac, it's paved. So I just, okay. And then we're talking about equity. Like, and it's, I'm how do I say this? decisions were made in the past that we weren't obviously here for, and it's frustrating. And so I feel like you kind of said it too, Liz, like there's gonna be winners and losers. And there even is some like winners and losers on the street tax and where we're paving roads, even though we do have a good process with this committee who's going through everything. So like, is it fair to those 6 homeowners that they have to pay if we go with that third option, any of those options, that they have to pay for that road to get done? I don't know. I'm struggling with that. And then, I'm thinking about all what you guys said and trying to hit some of these points. Miss Liz, you said about, with the new committee and if the tax gets approved again, hopefully Foster would rise to that. I think we're all smart folks. I think Foster should be up there. It's to the elementary. There's a lot of development going in there. Like it just has to be up there. And then, if the street sales tax is bringing in about $2 million a year, I would say try to go for that third option, get everybody to the table, see, stuff. But if people don't want to do it, I just say we just go do it. We got to get it done.
So what I would say, so I'm kind of where you're at. I guess I would want to know how many other unpaved roads are there, because then it's gonna be, we're picking and choosing the paved roads. I guess part of me, that's why I kind of wanted, I guess why I'm more leaning towards going the path where the committee picks which ones, because you're right, there's always gonna be something that doesn't rise, because there's a lot of unpaved roads and a lot. So having it go through the natural route, I feel also lends itself to the voters voting for this. Because I am a little, because obviously we have to, for this to go through, the voters have to vote for this. If they vote it down, then it's not gonna happen anyway. So I guess I felt like it got through the first time, and I think there was a lot of positives to it. And I think people are overall happy with how it turned out. So keeping it where the people get to choose, I guess that's where why I was going the route I was. Because if we start then saying, like you said, we don't have to pick one, then we go with both. Well, now we've just spent 4 million, potentially more, because obviously we're gonna have to think about other things that may be consequences to this. So we could have, so I guess that's why I guess want to leave it to the voters, or to leave it the path that we had before. But I'm not opposed, but that's sort of why I was going that route. But I really feel, I do agree with you, to put this on, the burden on others, if they want to take it on, this is so important to them, having those conversations. Also, I think everybody needs to really understand this, because I know tonight opened my eyes to a lot. So I think really them understanding that. Now, if they say, we understand this and this is important to us and we want to go forward, well, that's a whole other thing. And that's why part of me almost feels like not putting that half payment from the city tax or the tax in it. Do you want the SID or not? And then explaining that obviously we know this is expensive. We do have this other mechanism, not guaranteeing how fast it'll happen, but then this way there's no cost to you. And yes, some homes might raise up a little bit in their value. It's not gonna be tons, but that's been happening now as roads are getting repaved, that's raising the values of the houses. So it's happening all over already. So I think it's sort of, again, letting it happen. But that's sort of where I'm thinking, but I just want to make sure the tax passes.
My turn. A couple things on listening to everyone discuss, because I agree with both of you at the exact same time. So, I think the first step with the issue that's before us tonight, because we're starting to spiral off a little bit, is the reason that we're here is because the homeowners have called and said we would like a road. So I think the first step would be to approach those homeowners, educate them as best as we can with, this is how much it's going to cost, here are the options with that. And for that road to take place, I think it's important to treat every single person in Alamosa equally, and the road should look like every other road, no matter where it is. So if we do a road in Liz's district and it has the curbing and the sidewalks, we should equally do that. And there's going to be a cost to it, and people have to understand that, but it's a quality of life issue for me, and it's a social determinant for me to make it equal for all, no matter where they live in the city. So having said that, I think the first step would be to take this information back to the people that live there that are asking for this and giving them all the information that they need. And if they decide they don't want it because of the cost, then that's a discussion for a later date.
So I think Liz has brought up that she's not necessarily wanting us to offer the option of the street sales tax paying half of it. I think I just would like the rest of you guys to weigh in on that, because that dramatically impacts the conversation we're having with them. I mean, it cuts the cost in half. And
I agree with Liz.
so, yeah, I just need feedback on Liz throwing that out and where you guys are. That's
I'm on
what
board
she's
with that.
thrown out.
Yeah, I don't agree. That was my point, is to me, it doesn't feel right that as everybody's paying this street tax, yet, certain neighborhoods are reaping a 50% benefit. To Don's point, if all streets are gonna look the same, then that means that we have to come in the neighborhoods again, like mine, and adjust all these streets, and that's an exponential cost. So if we're gonna use the street sales tax the way it was meant to be, then it should be 100% dedicated to that street, the way the ordinance is laid out. And I think an SID in that tax complicates it greatly. Those SID areas should be handled differently, I think.
So we've got two people saying not to offer the paying half. Where are the rest of you guys? I know this isn't a voting thing, but I need
I-
enough guidance here.
I feel that we're gonna eventually have to reach a point where some of us will need assistance at some point, but I know, like Carson's saying, we'll have to entertain past things and future things. And at some point, the public needs to understand that slowly we're trying to just make things easier and better for people. So after listening and thinking, I'm having a hard time balancing equity with municipalities. And in my line of work, I don't think it exists. This is money thing. This is budget stuff. This is tax stuff. And I've learned that being here for the last month and a half, that the bleeding heart has a role, but it gets crushed by governance. But as I think explaining to the people what it looks like, you can offer that piece, I think, because then they understand. But us, I think, making decisions without certain people in the room, like the county, some of the big, like, conversations need to be held with just small CRHDC homes, and then RMI and bigger people, and say, look, we are addressing this, we're looking at this, this is what it looks like. I think just having that conversation will iron out some of this, but maybe we need to eliminate the third one, because if you bring up the equity piece, it's gonna just open up a whole nother can of worms, which I understand. But I know moving forward with the sidewalk thing, it does exist there too. Like, we are already meeting them halfway. So I don't want us to think we're not doing that, because you are, with trees, with sidewalks. I mean, so we are already doing that. And I know if you can afford it, you could do it. And if you can't, that could also be looked at being not fair. But it is us as a city saying, look, we're here to help, because you don't want the conversation just to solely be, they told us to do this, they told us to do that. We have to do this, we have to do that. So I think it's a fine balance of both. But I think the information, just me hearing as a homeowner, is eye-opening tonight. And even with RMI, for example, if they were like, whoa, like, we might want to bail this right now, because like they need to hear it. And I think it would eliminate our stresses right now. But then her other piece is, we do have a job still, and it's concentrating on which streets and which roads need to be done. So I'm glad we still have that ability. Now, which ones to pick and choose, whatever, the voters do that, but I think we have outlets for everything, but I think the information is the most important right now. I don't think we can make them vote. We can't make them see it different till they hear it. So I just request that the dissemination of information, maybe the third one is too hopeful for them and might get us in an equity conversation with whoever else, which in all sides of town, because that's sticky for me. I'm trying to hash out equity in this job and I don't think it exists. There's nothing that's equal. You either have money to do it or you don't, or with everything, with the capitating structures, like it doesn't matter how much of a good person you are. If you can't afford to fix it, you will lose it. And I think that conversation needs to stay true with everything that we do moving forward. In developing, when people sell properties, if you get a guy who comes here and builds 8 houses, I think there needs to be some kind of a cheat sheet that he needs to have that almost requires you to tell your sellers if you are in a potential position of setting them up for something like this. So I think the lack of information involved will solve the problem that we have. Because I know once they hear this, they might say, okay, we'll leave you alone. But then again, like you said, there's some other challenging things with number 3 now that I do see. I know it would make it easier to do, but I forget that they will go back to the 1960s and have us put sidewalks where they never were, and we just don't have the money for that either. But always offer an option moving forward, like the sidewalk thing. That is, if you can afford it, it's helping, and the city shows that they're meeting you halfway. Not that it's not fair, that if you can do it, we'll meet you. And so I just want to say that piece. So I agree, and maybe we should remove that just to avoid a bigger headache.
So I pretty
One
much
more
agree with
question.
you.
Just a minute, Michael. Jackie had her light on first.
So I pretty much agree with what you're saying, Jamie. When I first came on this council, I came in as like a heart person, like, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that, and I'm gonna bring all these concerns to council. But just being on the council, listening to everything, I didn't know a lot of these things about the street tax and everything else that I've learned along the way. And I've learned that I've had to take a look at myself and say, step back, because it's not always about the heart, Of course, you don't want people to be homeless, or you don't want a lot of things going on with people that live in your ward, and you want to listen to their concerns, but you always have to be realistic too. And like I said, I like what you said, that everything should look the same and be equal for everybody in Alamosa. So I agree, probably taking off the third option would be the way to go.
Michael?
Hey, so, can these 3 streets, or, I mean, because they are full streets, can they be added to that matrix when we're running that committee and organically rise to the list? Is that a possibility or no?
Yeah, they were part of the initial list previously.
Okay, thank you.
And I guess did anybody have their light on? So, and I think having it organically, so making, obviously that some people will be in the know, but not saying, so technically this road should have been paved, or, really making it organic. So when the committee looks at it, they're really looking at it from all the different checkpoints that they're looking for that. Because again, I think our goal is to get these done, but I guess that goes back to why I said potentially not including that tax, because I think it does open up a lot of other things. So then it comes to those 6, I'm just gonna use those 6 houses. They're like, why do we only get half the tax when this street got the full tax? And why are we, so it's just, I think even though it's out of the kindness and we're trying to help, I think it's gonna backfire.
Does anyone want to weigh on this before I mention something else?
I just have one more. And it's mostly positive. I agree with my fellow counselors that it should, having heard what has been said, it does need to be removed, stricken, from the decision-making process. type thing. But even looking at it from a fiscal standpoint, from the city, that's monies that we can put out to maybe do 2 roads instead of the one. If that particular road doesn't bubble to the top, it'll be able to get spread further.
So I was just gonna, so I feel like we've got clear direction, but I want to make sure everyone is ready for how this could play out type of thing. So we approach the property owners and we'll do the one where the city back 10-year because it's a little bit cheaper type of situation. You know, what we would expect is for the larger properties to probably have, you know, a fairly significant heck no type of reaction. And then potentially even the smaller ones to have a little bit of a sticker shock type of situation. And so then the conversation's like, well, if you're not interested, you know, what we're willing to do is it'll be considered like any of the other streets as it goes through that process. Here's what the process is council used last time, da, 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 type of thing. Maybe it will rise to the top and get picked as one of the streets for the next 5 years type of thing. It may not. So that list had over 70 streets that the committee had identified needed repair. And I think we did 10, 14. So the magnitude of the needs as it relates to streets, I just want to, so it could be, I have no idea if it will bubble to the top. There's a lot of things going on, but say it doesn't, you will be hearing from them for the next 5 years on when's my street going to get paved. I just, this doesn't make it go away just because I've told them how expensive it is to do an SID and then their street's not picked for the sales tax type of situation.
So what I'm hoping, and you're right, there's still some, but there's also other people on other streets who have the same thing.
Yeah.
What I'm hoping, and I really do think this, what Jamie said is information, that knowledge, that I'm hoping that, so, and again, I can keep picking on the 6 houses, but let's just use those 6 houses, that even 4 out of the 6, after they really hear what it takes to do a street, because obviously they're just thinking the city should just build us a street. When they really hear all the information, and that even that you didn't realize this, but chances are you got your house a little cheaper because of this, all of these different things, that hopefully there's some, I don't want to call it common sense, but that idea of, just like how our eyes got open tonight, is that idea that that hopefully they see the city's doing the best they can, that hopefully maybe we rise to top. We can't afford this part of it. We didn't realize to what extent this expense was. You know, obviously being, I guess, thankful, or I don't want to say thankful, that's not the right word, but being, hey, we have a house, we have a place to live. We don't want to take that risk of losing that house. Now, they may all say, hey, we actually want this. This is important to us and we're willing to invest that money into it, whichever way. But I'm hoping, I guess, and I guess I looked at all you, is that maybe that true, really explaining everything will help soften maybe the conversations that were happening.
Does the street tax sunset in 2027 or
2029.
29? 29.
2029. I don't want to get into it now, but when we have our joint dinner with the commissioners, part of what Ronnie and I are talking about is needing to do an update on the levy project and how to fund that, which may mean that we may want to take the extension of the street sales tax a little bit earlier. So it still goes to 2029 and we would still add the 5 years after 2029, but that we may want to get the extension approved a little bit sooner.
With the 2 million that we're bringing in roughly on the sales tax, and then with how good Harry and you guys have been with getting things done sooner and quicker and under budget, I know we had that unfunded list. Have we tapped into those a little bit? Like move them to 2028 or 29?
We haven't gotten to the ones that are listed, like if we have extra money.
Yeah.
We haven't gotten to those.
Will we? Do you project that we might?
I think we might be able to pick a few off the top, but I don't think we'll get very deep into it. So maybe the first alternate, because they're identified, I just don't recall the streets, this one's
Right.
next and then this one. We might be able to pick up that first one,
And, that wouldn't happen until 29.
correct? Yeah.
Okay.
I think if I remember right, if the tax doesn't sunset, we continue to use the funding until it's depleted. And that might carry us into 2030 on those alternate roads using the funding. If it
Could
didn't.
we reevaluate since it went to 2029? Could we say we want to have a new survey done? Because things change. And so we promised that till 2029, we would do that list, right? Could we say, so now, so let's say we put this to 2027, we're gonna put on, I'm just making up a date, we put it on the ballot or whatever, we decide to put it earlier. So then we'll reevaluate and say, okay, so for this new election, this is the order of the priorities, like how we did for the first ballot.
That's exactly what I was thinking you guys would.
But you were
do.
saying that it could go to 20, that we could keep
Yep.
go.
So I'm a little confused on how Harry worded his thing. So if the tax isn't renewed, we still collect the tax and we'll spend all that tax that came up through its expiration date. And that money that came in associated to that resolution would go to those projects.
That's correct.
Okay.
I misunderstood. I thought you were saying if it got redone, we'll just keep doing that list. I'd rather reevaluate the list.
Yeah,
If
no,
it's-
I don't. Yeah, I think that was a confusing wording type of situation. The resolution's pretty clear on its, yeah, and for a transparency trust, I don't, yeah.
So I kind of disagree with all you well, I do agree we shouldn't do the third option. But I think we just got to go in there and get it done and do it as soon as possible. And because we're like 5 years out from this. And we have a bunch of growth coming in that area.
Council can accept the recommendations of the street committee as presented, or council can move them around.
Yeah, I did share that, but as a reminder, yes, and you guys did it the last time. You guys did move stuff around.
5 years out. A lot of growth coming up. We're gonna have a dirt road.
Well, and so that's a lot of conversation you guys can still have on that. What I'm seeing though is at least for these initial conversations, there's consensus not to offer the third option. That's the more immediate time sensitive type of thing. And then you guys have a year or two to figure out your gut on that other stuff. Okay, is there any more questions on SIDs? We have another topic. Oh. We did have 3 topics for tonight, but one got moved. So,
I have one
Okay.
question. And just to clarify Jan's comment, if we say, hey, let's take it to foster people and they say, yes, we're gonna pay for it, where would they fall in the road actually getting built?
I think Harry would have to think through what can we do from a project management perspective. If there's an easier year from a construction perspective that we could fit it in. There's also capacity issues sometimes with our contractors. So we would have to take a look and see how we would fit that in type of
Okay,
thing.
but it would still be an answer in years type thing, like next year or 2 years from now or.
Correct,
3
yeah,
Okay,
yes.
okay, thank you.
Do you agree with what I said?
Yeah, I was just trying to understand.
Oh, okay. So before Deacon starts, he's done another wonderful presentation that I don't want to preempt him on. But to give a little bit of some background, on your next council meeting is going to be your formal actions as it relates to the Tierra Azul stuff. And there's different things that are going to be coming before you. So it's the development agreement, different types of things like that. We did have a work session. We talked through these things. You guys have heard how we've been really aggressive going after grants, and the amazing success we've seen there. And you've been there for the housing plan and all of this, and we've mentioned things, but what I was a little nervous about is It's also your official action to waive some of the fees. And even though I think we've talked about this, and that's part of the city helping out with the project, it fits the plan, the housing plan, it's the type of housing we need, all of that kind of stuff. Conceptually, just saying, yes, we're gonna waive fees, and now seeing how much that is, I didn't want you guys to have sticker shock, right? I didn't want you to be in the middle of a regular meeting being like, oh, those are some pretty significant fees. But they were integral in getting the millions of dollars that we were able to get. So Deacon, if you want to kind of walk us through this.
Yeah, and just a quick point of clarification, the three actions will be on the May 15th agenda. So it's a little ways away. The three items would be the ratification of Planning Commission's approval of the final development plan. It's a mouthful. The second would be the Development Improvement Agreement, which essentially lays out what the expectations are as far as when the roads get built, what, the standards, yada, yada, yada. And then the fee waiver. So we'll just kind of jump into it. A lot of this, there's a lot of numbers to move around, and I do have a handout for you as well, but I will walk you through it. I won't take too much time though. So how did we come to these sort of numbers and decisions? Well, first is a housing needs assessment and action plan. Gave us really clear guidance on what we should be doing. The resolution 5/2023 was passed by city council to authorize the city manager to pursue housing grants. And then, at our April 2023 work session, we also, discussed these, but we now have at least some good numbers to offer. And so I want to be direct that a lot of these fee waivers are our matching portion for the grants that we've been successful in receiving. So essentially what we did was we were like, okay, we've got the resolution, we've got the housing needs assessment, we've got past precedent, we've got all these things. So like, this is how, the best we can, like if we want to try to get $6.2 million for infrastructure, this is how we can come up with our portion of the match without it hopefully affecting the bottom line. And so that was really our goal. Okay, so as far as the housing action plan, this is very relevant to the past discussion. So the capital gap is just kind of the concept in housing that the cost to build housing for a lot of different housing it's not profitable for most private developers. So there has to be some way to make up that cost gap. So for example, these two figures are directly from our housing needs assessment and action plan. Essentially, it was like, this is the cost to build. This is how much, either as far as the infrastructure costs, design costs, construction costs. And so there's going to be some sort of gap. How do you make that gap up? So one example on the left is kind of the traditional single family home that we've been seeing being built in CRHDC. The one on the right is kind of using Iron Horse as a somewhat of an example of, without sorts of subsidies, these housing units don't get built. One of our identified goals, just highlighted it really quick in the action plan, is contribute funds through fee waivers, reductions, and deferrals with possible cost recovery. So this is how we get housing built through infrastructure and development partnerships. So that's one of the directions we've been going. The last thing from the housing action plan. So, we did a lot of outreach, and I think it's easy to forget how much response we got from the community. So these were our 4 top incentives that were chosen by the respondents from the community, what they thought were the most appropriate incentives. And supporting building small units, guess what, guys? We've already got that done. We've done pretty much everything we can on accessory dwelling units and casitas. Make it easier to build more affordable homes. We've done that in a gajillion ways. Don't want to go down that rabbit hole. Allow parking reductions. Also just did that. And then finally, reduced or free water, sewer, tap fees or permits. So these were kind of the 4 top things. Really, we've done 3 of the 4. And traditionally, for especially Habitat for Humanity and other CRHCC projects, and for Iron Horse, fee waivers are something that we've done before as well. Okay, so we're presented with this challenge. There's a lot of money, especially for infrastructure for housing, both for the vertical construction, which is like the foundation up, and then the horizontal, which is the roads and the sewer lines and all of that jazz. So how do we do that? How do we achieve a match without really impacting the city's long-term finances? So that was really what we did, and we had to get a little bit creative. Essentially, I'll be blunt, making up fees that we could be charging that we are not charging and we have historically not charged, but we certainly could be charging as a portion of our match. So some of these numbers, when you look at these very high numbers, they're, I don't want to say they're made up. There are numbers that we could be charging, but we historically have not, but they're included in those sort of financial metrics. Okay, so as far as the fee waivers, so again, we just talked briefly about vertical infrastructure versus horizontal fees. That was really important for some of our funding mechanisms because some funding is only for vertical, some is only for infrastructure. And then another sort of important concept is the unrealized income versus expected revenue. So if we don't collect money from a building permit fee, that is unrealized income because that was not money we were expecting using for budgetary reasons, so on and so forth. Expected revenue would be something like sales tax generation that we are counting on this, essentially, to build our budgets. And then really we've got 4 fee types. We've got tap and plant investment fees. So that's water and sewer, building permit fees. We have park dedication fees and fees in lieu of. So if you don't build a park, you can pay a fair market value of that. And then infrastructure upgrade proportional cost. So if we upgrade the center lift station, a certain amount of that is dedicated to a development, and they have a certain portion of that pie that they would be responsible for. So I just really tried to break it down. Is it something that we usually charge? Have we waived it before? Is it unexpected finances versus expected, and then vertical versus horizontal, and then just a handful of notes. Really, I just wanted to point out tap fees. We normally charge, plan investment fees normally charge, building permits, yes. Park dedication, not historically. Infrastructure upgrades, not historically. We've typically waived all of those. The only time we've waived the park dedication fee was for Iron Horse. Essentially, that was the only development that we've had that has triggered it since the code was updated in 2018. The only expected revenue is the plant investment fee. So essentially, that's to offset the ongoing upgrades and perpetual maintenance for our water treatment plant and our wastewater treatment plant. Okay, so now comes the sticker shock. When we look at, so when we look at water taps, sewer taps, and building permits, again, those are the 3 that we typically have historically weighed. Now, I should back up. We're talking 137 housing units. So that's what this is encompassing. It's and again, we can hand out, the sheet that breaks it all down essentially per unit. But this is just all lumped together. Again, park dedication fees, not something that we've historically charged or collected, but we certainly can. The sanitary, the Foster Stormwater Lift Station project. So that's something that has been dedicated in the city's capital improvement plan for a long time, and it's essentially wrapping up. Again, we can charge a proportional cost of that. Of if it costs $1 million and it is 9% of that, of that capacity of that lift station, we can charge $90,000. And then the sanitary sewer connection fees. So we recently were successful in getting grants for West 7th and the center lift stations. A lot of that was funded through grant funds, but essentially that $27,000 figure is the proportional share of our match to that grant. But again, a lot of these grants that we got, especially for the lift station upgrades, part of our pitch to it is we have 400 housing units coming online in the next couple decades. And if we don't fix these bottlenecks, this is a big problem for our housing. So it's kind of playing both angles for different sort of funding mechanisms. The developer has indicated, their part of it is a good faith effort. Also, part of it is our long-term sort of budget thoughts are the plant investment fees. So essentially, when you have a tap fee, part of it pays for the tap, part of it pays for the plant investment. So that would be something that they have said that they would be, paying for. The water and sewer. Okay, last slide. Okay, so again, this development has really helped us achieve a lot of, community needs, not just specific to the development. Again, this proposal shouldn't affect any of our long-term budgets because none of the proposed fee waivers are expected revenue. The subsidies that are in this sort of package are in line with what we've done historically, what past councils have approved. And then I think this is also a really nifty unit. It works out to about just under $7,800 per unit in subsidies. So just to kind of have a ballpark, what phase 1 and 2, this 137 units costs, the infrastructure, the horizontal infrastructure is about $10 million. And, per unit, the for sale, like the single family homes are about $300,000 to construct, and the for rent are about 375. So when you look at all those numbers, the entire project, that's about between 50 and $65 million for 137 units. And really our match is about $1 million of that. So that's kind of the summary.
Yeah, it's those types of numbers make it clear how we got into this housing crisis too. I mean, it's just so expensive to construct housing. So can you go back to the cost, the $1 million price tag? Just wanted to make sure you guys saw that before it's showing up on your council agenda type of thing. Any questions while we're here? Obviously, Ty is abstaining from this conversation. I should have made that clear as well.
Do they have any, I hate to go back, but does any of this reflect building the road on Foster?
So the $10 million figure for the infrastructure for phases 1 and 2 includes the cost for their stretch of Foster.
But they're gonna escrow it because building half a
Right.
street, yeah,
Yeah.
yes.
Right. So that is built into the $60 million price tag.
This is all we have for you guys. So it just, even for me, when I'm like, we're philosophically talking about waiving fees and all this, and then when I saw them, I was like, oh, we better show this to council before it's on the agenda. So.
My only comment to this is just a huge thank you to Deacon for putting together all of this information on both presentations. It was very much appreciated.
Can I ask one question? Something more for future. We don't have to get into major discussion now. But I'm realizing that a lot of the development for housing, whatever we do, the other half of the street is not good. We have half a street that develops and another half that doesn't. And it feels like it's going to continue to go this way for a long time. So my question is, and I'm not even sure where this would go, but that idea, so let's take this development here and this money's in escrow. The part across the street may never get developed. So then technically the other half's not getting built. And then that money in escrow really isn't going to amount to much because by the time it ever does, it's not going to matter. Is it something we as a city could think about and or thinking outside the box of when we have that type of building is can the city build the other half with the idea that then if that person that owns that property ever does develop, they have to then pay that back or something?
You guys already passed an ordinance that allows the creation of, I don't know if I'll get all the language correctly, but it's an improvement area. And there's a few hoops the developer and as us as the developer would have to kind of jump through, like notifying the property owners and all of that. I'm not sure if we're the developer, because I think some of it's decided by council if they want to appeal it and stuff. So we'd have to think through some of that type of thing, but I think there's ways to accomplish it. But the other thing too is this kind of goes back to Deacon's other thing, which is if we're requiring these things, it makes it so hard for some of the properties to develop. I really think, if we ever can get some time is to do some research of if other cities have figured this out. And because this can't just be unique to us to where, you know, we're getting some development, but then to make them pay for the whole thing doesn't make any sense.
Right.
And then it's just, you know, and all of that kind of stuff are these properties that are, you know, by 3 roads. And so if it, you know, it's going to sit vacant forever. And so I think if we could, you know, maybe try to take like a year or something
Yeah, no.
to really do some research of, is there some tricks to the trade out there that could make some of this more palatable?
Because I feel like no matter what we do, there's some of that in the next 20 years, it's not getting developed. And so we need to be realistic to that. And so doing that, so that's what I'm asking for. So again, just thought I'd throw it out there because we're gonna keep having these conversations of half roads and then so really no roads getting built. So how do we solve that? I guess that's okay.
I've been asking myself the same question a couple of times a week for a couple of years.
Just a quick question. Do they plan on building a park?
So yes, the stormwater basin is also a park. Also, there's connectivity that, one of the things in the development improvement agreement is they are building to their property line and then essentially depositing money for the city to connect it to the Montaña Azul Park directly to the north.
Thank you.
So that's everything if you guys want to be done.
Thank you.